Thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to present for you a part of my PhD, which is related to Grzegorczyk, as you already know. I won't tell you right now whether he was a translator or not, because it's actually quite tricky. But he was called a servant of greatness. He was called like that by his friend. When he died, in the obituary note in the press, he was called servant of greatness. And I actually think that he is forgotten. So there are two things you know about Grzegorczyk for now. I will just tell you what you will hear about in upcoming minutes. So first of all, I will say a few words about my PhD project in general, because actually I kind of encountered Grzegorczyk by accident. So I would like to say a few words about this accident. Later, I got inspired, like Lucia, by the title of the conference, so I will tell you who is afraid of translator studies in Poland and what's the state of affairs and the visibility of translators in Poland. And later, I will move on to the case of Grzegorczyk, because I think it merges with the conference and also with my inquiries related to the PhD as such. So actually my PhD journey already started 4 years ago, and it started from my fascination by the interwar period in Poland because of my MA. I did my MA in reception studies of Katrin Mansfield's prose in Poland. Katrin Mansfield is not very well recognized in Poland nowadays. It has slightly changed recently, but when I started to investigate Katrin Mansfield, she was totally forgotten. Completely the opposite than Virginia Woolf, for example, which is well recognized in Poland right now. And I realized that while studying her reception in the interwar period, I found some very interesting facts about this 20 years of Polish history and cultural history, literary history, that were not actually visible in any other sources. Because you have to know that interwar period in Poland right now is very popular in culture, is highly idealized, and usually is studied by conservative literary historians. So there were many tensions back then. It was, a turbulent time between the First and the Second World War. So I think translation can actually help us understand this period better, and that's why I decided to do my PhD about this period. And I started from the policies of translation because I thought that that's something I would like to investigate. My idea was to investigate 3 institutions, which was Polish Pen Club, one very prominent Polish publishing house, Ruch, and the literary annual Rocznik Literacki from the 30s. And 3 people. I didn't have an idea how to actually mix those things together, but that was my initial idea. But when I was started investigating those institutions, I realized that I actually go to people directly. I mean, even if I investigate the policy of certain institution, I look for names, and I'm more interested in the archival work. So I decided to change my title. Also, I get rid of the English language prose part, which was very problematic. It's easier to distinguish between languages when you study particular institution, obviously, at least in theory. But when I moved to people, obviously, it became much more unpredictable. So I decided to apply microhistories. And I wanted to study people only. Back then I wanted to study only female translators to give back their voice, because they are less recognized than male translators. And right now I'm actually thinking about the broader scope of culture mediators, not particularly translator, and the reason for that is actually Grzegorczyk. You can also see my main research question, in which you can see that I put focus on translators, on unpredictable people in general. So this is the list of people I'm investigating. So you have 3 female translators and 3 male figures. Just to give you an idea, probably the only more or less recognized person is Paweł Kulka-Laskowski, but he's known mostly for his own works. Other people are not remembered, I would say, right now. Some of them are, if they are remembered in a very Kermatic circles, they are remembered only for translations. For example, Bolesława Kopelówna and Maria Godlewska were translators of Katrin Mansfield, so that's how I encountered them. Just want to check whether I forget something or not, hopefully not. Yeah, and actually this problem I encountered was that I was thinking about those policies which we usually identify with sociology of translation, and I was looking at people's archives, and I was interested in, bringing back voice of those people, which dragged me to translation history. And for some time I had this obsession of finding the right answer to the question, what's the relation between sociology of translation and translation history? So if you have any ideas, we can talk about that during the discussion, because now it's not my obsession anymore, but I'm still, interested in what other people and other scholars think about it. I asked some scholars, for example, Christopher Rundle, who thinks that it's impossible to actually merge those two approaches. For me, translator studies is actually a bridge between those two. It's kind of a simplification, but I think it helps me get rid of this obsession of finding my way in one neat field of study. So I just decided to study people. And in this approach, in this interdisciplinary approach to of translator studies, mostly influenced by the history of translation, there is this trend right now to incorporate microhistories, and there are some elaboration of that, so you can actually see different scales of the history, because obviously it is important that microhistory is micro, but at the same time I think very important is this dynamic, which when we want to investigate people we have to be aware of. So I really like the way Uti Palofowski put it, that microhistory focuses on the movement across space. Daniel Little proposed the term of mesohistory. I think that the most important thing and what those approaches share is the fact that we are interested in the dynamic, and we are zooming in and out in order to get to know the people we want to know about more better. So I think it's important in relation to Anthony Pym's seminal book, Method in Translation History, where he proved that translators usually do other things, that they not only translate. That's why it's important not to focus primarily on the translation, because sometimes people obviously stop translating for various reasons, or they move, or they go under different names, they have bodies, so sometimes they are ill, and they are tortured, many things occurred. So especially in the period I'm investigating, it's important because it was also politically rich, let's say, and turbulent. So that's why it's useful for me. And before I move on to Grzegorczyk, I would like to say a few words about the state of affairs in Poland right now. So as we know, translator can do more than just translating. So Polish translators, if they are scholars, they organize conferences in order to gain visibility. There was one quite big conference in Poznań at Adam Mickiewicz University, which is a big center of translation in Poland. There were some publications after that. Obviously, there are some individual projects, but right now there was launched the big project, A Century of Translation, and you can see that A Century of Translation focuses on translators and their work in Polish literature after 1980. But a translator outside of the academia do also other things. And here I would like to say a few words about a very interesting book of Krzysztof Umiński. He's a translator from English and French. He's a script writer as well. And he published a book, Trzy Tłumaczki, 3 female translators. That would be the translation of that, in which he investigated the lives of 3 very prominent female translators from the second half of 20th century. Like, I think that all Polish people read in schools their translations, but usually they are not aware of their names. They translated from English and from French mainly. One of them is still alive, and Umiński also interviewed her. So he tried to find his own methodology in order to talk about female translators whose archives are scattered or does not exist. And he also incorporated a very microhistorical approach, because he doesn't want to pretend that he is objective. He is translator himself, and he's a male translator, and he writes it in a very particular moment in history in general. So he was actually criticized for that, but I think that's the biggest power of the book, that he didn't pretend to be objective. And he's also a member of Polish Literary Translators Association. It was established in 2010. And it is a very important initiative because it's very inclusive. They invite also beginners, I would say, early career translators from different languages. And we were talking about the book covers. So actually, Polish Literary Translator Associations tries to make translators more visible. They also assess some publishers in order in relation to how they treat their translators. For example, they also deal with prestige and with rates for translators. We were laughing this morning about this quote you showed us, the money a translator can get. Actually, in Polish conditions, well, I wouldn't say that it's that funny, but well, hopefully it will change. And also the way translator gains visibility are retranslations, especially when the translator of a new rendition of a book changes the title. So that was actually the case recently with Anne of Green Gables, and it was very controversial for some reasons. People were attacking Anna Bańkowska because she changed the title and I don't know, destroyed the memories from childhood of many people. And now we will move on to Piotr Grzegorczyk. So I tried to find a way to incorporate his life and work in my thesis, because when I was investigating the literary annual I told you about, I found his very interesting essays, not directly about translation, more about translation policy and the status of language, Polish language in Europe back then. Because my initial idea was to look in the literary annual only in the section devoted to English language, translations from English into Polish. But later I decided to read everything in Rocznik Literacki, and I found out that Grzegorczyk appears every year in every single issue, writing about culture, about economy, about many other things, but dealing with the position of Polish culture and Poland in Europe in general. So I wanted to approach him as a translator. So the first list of things is the list of cities. So he was born in Grybów, he went to school in Lviv, and then he studied Polish studies in Warsaw, and then he worked in the library in Kraków, and he died in Kraków. He was a bibliographer and biographer. As I said, he was called a servant of greatness, which is very telling that he was called like that after his death by his friends, who also regretted that he didn't make an academic career, so he didn't have students. He was just a mere MA working in the library. And this, I think that we can consider this being the servant of greatness, not only in relation to names you can see. You can see there are only male now, maybe you don't know, but there are actually only male names of writers, Polish writers and international writers. But he was also a servant of other academics who made their career thanks to his work, because he was just, sitting in the library collecting the information that now we can usually find in Google easily, but sometimes not. So he did all of that through his entire life. And he was editor of periodicals, literary critic, interested in theater as well, in theory of translation. And I wanted to look at his work and his publications through the lens of translation. So through the lens of translation as a process, as a product, and as, interpersonal relations. We already said a few words about translation policies, and I will come back to that slightly later. We know also about the translation criticism and theory of translation. You can see questions of translation, bibliographical study. He also published a very interesting book, a self-study guide for Poles about the Jewish language, the Yiddish. He said that the aim of this publication is to allow Polish people read Jewish press written in Yiddish. And also, recently, I found out that he also translated, so he was a translator. He translated essays from Italian, from French, from German, and from English. There were usually political essays. I just mentioned one of them. And you can see the date when it was published. So it was actually during the Second World War. And he was this servant of greatness, and he was, silent and sitting in the library, but still he was a male figure. That's why his archives exist actually in the National Library. I am going to read through his letters. But when I went to my university library, I found a brilliant woman. I think we all know this brilliant person in the library who knows everything. And she told me that actually she studied Grzegorczyk some time ago for her own interest. And she brought me a book with his handwriting, because he dedicated one of the copy to the library, university library, shortly before his death. And you can see the cover of one of his important book on dictionaries. And for the very last thing I would like to say is I would like to show you how he perceived the role of translation in building the position of particular country. So for him, being translated was something that should be gained by Polish literature. And he said that Poland makes this mistake of, being obsessed with the past, being obsessed with hermetic stories, and is not actually, that's not something attractive for other countries. So he said that it would be important to make other countries interested by Polish literature, and not only political situation, for example, or the minorities, let's say. And it was very modern, I would say, in his approach, that he saw the importance not only of the production of literature, but also the consumption of literature as such. And he had some very brilliant ideas, like, for example, organizing trips to Poland for people from other countries, because he thought that these personal memories would attract people to, certain culture more than just lectures, for example. But he also meticulously noted lectures of Polish scholars abroad, for example. This is just a slide where I wanted to show you that we have 86, probably you don't see it, but we have 86 bunch of letters, boxes of letters in the National Library archive of his. And as a conclusion, I just wanted to stress again the importance of interdisciplinarity while investigating translators. And also I would like to note this gender issue as well, because although he was a servant of greatness, although we have this notion of translators being in the shadow, I think, especially after my experiences with other, especially female translators, it was not that difficult for me to actually find out so many information about him. And yeah, the very last thing, there are my references, and there's the quote I really like, and that's why I think it's important to map even tiny little scattered pieces of translation histories. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, so much for this interesting presentation. She will be taking questions now. Does anyone have a question?
First of all, thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. I think I kind of have an off-topic question.
Mm-hmm.
When you talked before about the retranslations carried out in Poland and the case of Green Gables, I was just very curious if you could tell me a bit more about that particular case, because I'm studying retranslations as well for my project, and there are a few instances of like infamous retranslations in Italy as well, so I just wanted to know about that.
Well, this particular case is very interesting also because of the association, professional association I mentioned, because they took part in this debate, I would say. I think, it's a book usually associated with, well, it was written in Poland some time ago also by me when I was a child. So I think it's also, it plays with different emotions and different views of the stories you get to know a long time ago. Anna Bańkowska is a very good translator, and it wasn't like she just, decided to do that for the sake of whatever reason. It's a very good translation. It is much more accurate, I would say, than the previous one, even in the title, because the previous title would be something like Anne from Green Hills, let's say. And it's not even Anne, but it's Ania, so the Polish version of the name. So she kind of foreignized the translation for readers right now, and there were some issues with censorship as well in the previous ones, some taboo hints, let's say. And there are other books like that. For example, translations of Marcel Proust recently, they also had different names than previously, but I think because it's not the book we usually read when we are, 6 or 7, it was much less emotional, I would say. And in terms of Green Gables, it was visible in many different blogs and on Facebook. And also there is a very interesting story behind the first translator of Green Gables, because I think there were 12 retranslations already, but all of them maintained the initial title, Polish title. So that's the first time we can see something different there. And the identity of the first translator is still unknown. It's a very mysterious story, and some scholars really enjoy that, like pop scholars, I would say. It's a nice story to tell about the mysterious Rosalia Bersztajnowa, who was the so-called translator of the first version. So yeah, many emotions involved there.
Thank you for the presentation. I think on one of your slides it was written that, sorry, I'll try to pronounce it. Grzegorczyk?
Yeah.
That he translated Conrad back into Polish?
No,
okay,
he
sorry.
collected.
But I just saw the name of.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a list of people whose bibliographies he collected.
Oh, he collected bibliographies.
Yes, he made like a huge list of works of certain people, and there was Conrad as well.
But do you look at any translations of Conrad back into Polish or back? Just I was curious.
Yeah, I mean, my supervisor actually translated Conrad. So yeah, there is a long history of that, but it has nothing to do with Grzegorczyk. Sorry for that. I know that I'm a little bit chaotic. I have all those papers, and then I start talking, and obviously I know that sometimes it's difficult to follow. So sorry for that.
Okay, thank you. Well, it just would be really interesting to hear if you have anything to say about translators' response on Conrad's choice to write in English rather than in Polish, and how they, I I don't know, didn't they see it as some kind of, I don't know, betrayal on his side instead of to be translated by them?
I mean,
he wrote into English.
It's a long story of the discussion of that. Right now we are more, I think, excited by the new retranslation of Anne of Green Gables, and on this kind of, already aside, I mean, the recent translations of Conrad, some of them are very freestyle, I would say. For example, the translation of Heart of Darkness is very far from the original in many different ways. So I think it's already, it has his position in the culture, and now we can kind of play with that, and we can do some interesting retranslations like comic books, for example, out of Heart of Darkness.
Anyone else?
Hi, thank you as well for your presentation. It was very interesting, especially because I'm researching something that's quite similar, so I'm working with a lot of the same theories. And you said, you quoted Pym that translators can do more than translate, and he seemed to do a lot of things in addition to translating. Do you know anything about how he saw himself? Did he see himself as a translator, or was it something entirely
Well,
different?
that's the question I would like to answer in, well, I ask to all the people I investigate, and all of them did many other things. It's also because of the period, I would say, in which it happened, and also, the situation of translators in Poland back then and right now in terms of salary, for example. I don't think he considered him, well, I'm pretty sure he didn't consider himself primarily as a translator. He was very much attached to his work in the library and collecting, bibliographical entries and writing dictionaries, and also sometimes he corrected mistakes of other scholars because he was an editor as well. So they knew that he would just help them. Sometimes there are some records of that he didn't even tell that he actually found some mistakes because it didn't really matter. So he knew, so he just made it for them like this silent servant of greatness in many ways. Yeah, but I'm that's why I want to look at his archive, because I already read some of his letters, and there is nothing about his own position as a translator, and that's something I really would like to look at, so we'll see.
Thank you so much for looking forward to see what you're going to do in the future.